What's up, guys? Philip at Trade Genius. All right, we're going to take a look at Bitcoin, see what's in store for the week ahead. Been a lot of drama, Bitfinex and Tether back in the news, so we're going to see how that affected things. So we're going to take a look at the weekly chart. We're going to see how that's playing out. We're going to take a look at our futures expiration chart and see what that means. And we're also going to take a look at crypto fear and greed. All right, guys, so let's dive into this video and check all that out.
Trade Genius.
All right, guys, so this is the BLX weekly chart, and just a couple of things I wanted to point out here. The moving average is 200 period moving averages in red, 50 period moving averages in orange on the weekly chart. So typically we pull back to the 200 on big bear markets and then bounce up, and typically we bounce up into the 50 weekly moving average. And what happens there is what's happened in the past is you get up to this, you can get above it a little bit, but every time we tend to roll over. So big picture, we're looking at possibly 1 to 2 months of actually a pullback and consolidation. And we'll get into those levels in a little bit here, but that's typically what's happened. Now, will the time frame and these levels that's here superimposed in these black monthly bars play out exactly? Every cycle is a little bit different, but I think structurally, I think this is something that you should expect. Now, whether or not these levels pull back this deep or whether it takes this long, that's probably going to be a variable that changes, but something to this effect is what you should have your head wrapped around that's likely to happen. Most people are expecting a push up into this resistance zone right around that 6,200 level. But I think this 50 period historically has just been much more of a reliable indicator of resistance. So, and I'll show you a couple other things why I think at least the next couple of weekly bars will probably be red. But that's the big picture, what we're looking at here. All right, so now let's look at the Coinbase chart. Big thing here that I'm seeing is our money maker sell indicator. And if you guys are interested in that, head over to tradelikeagenius.com. We have this running at a discount. You can get this 40% off, and that's a 12-month access to that indicator. But that's signaling a weekly short here on Bitcoin. Last time we saw that, guys, was at the very top of the market. I do like this indicator on this weekly chart because it does give us a good areas of where we see some pause in the action. So that first pullback signal the moneymaker sell, and that was a big start of the bear market. And during the bull market, right? So those bull market counter signals are going to be short-lived just because you're in a bull cycle, so they always do. But you'll get more of a counter move because things get overbought more often. So you can see here, this one lasted for about a week, or actually into 1 to 2 weeks. The following bar was red and it came back up. That was the beginning part of 2017. This one lasted 1 week, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks before that cycle had played out. 3 weeks here. This one was in the right smack dab middle of the bull move and got run over. Okay, but this is key because this actually is a fight zone and will be a key point of resistance as we get back up into those ranges. But now we're finally getting one, and we haven't seen one fire in quite some time. This moneymaker sell was basically saying that sell cycle was in play all the way down. Flipped down at this juncture because now we're making a series of higher highs and higher lows. But so we've hit one here. So, typically I tend to respect these. And again, I would think that this would indicate at least a couple of weeks of, if nothing else, consolidation. But I would be very surprised if this got ran over at this point because of where we're at in the price action. Now, also too, your stochastics are quite a bit overbought and are actually crossing over, which this isn't using this calculation, but they both are correlating. So whenever I see a couple of things or more lining up, to me, that gives me a little more confidence in what's going to happen. Again, I think we're just going to see some resistance here, but most people thinking that we're going to push higher, I think there's a lot of things lining up against that move in particular. Still bullish overall on Bitcoin. It's just that, immediately looking ahead, I don't think you want to be swinging for the fences right here. We're also in this volume void. This volume void is going to get backfilled. So essentially, guys, what we would be looking at is, if I switch back to the BLX chart, we're looking at basically this range I think is going to be in play for a while. We're going to see that range and basically this range. Okay, so that's basically this area of support. and this area of resistance, and see price meander in here. And then when we start seeing price push back up into these levels, and you'll probably see that more on the weekly chart, kind of similar to what you see when you see a level start to get chewed on. That's when people get a little more bullish, and I think the smarter investors start looking at possibly a short squeeze that's going to ensue. When you make that first run up to resistance, not everybody, the desire to get long up into that resistance is gonna fade. Okay, and then the resistance is going to come into play like we've seen here. This red line, this red zone, is actually off the 3-day chart, and that is this bar here. Basically, was that kind of that fight before it moved higher. So typically, when we see those last stands of a bar that's counter the overall move, those areas come back into play. And you can see price came up to that and has been rejecting off that level quite nicely. So those are important to keep in mind when those appear. But overall, guys, I think what we're looking at is just a pullback, and I think you have the indicators showing us that there's going to be some weakness, also these price levels. So then it comes into, all right, well, what are we looking at for a pullback? So let's drill down to the 4-hour. All right, 4-hour had a bit of an ascending wedge. Those are bearish. It fell out of that. I think this area here is going to be key. I'm not impressed that we keep testing it. I think another test just improves the probability that fails. And then at that point, okay, what are we looking at if that fails? This is a daily chart. So if we go down to the 4-hour, I'm actually looking, I think probably what's going to happen is we're going to see some kind of bounce. If this area does not hold, okay, I think it will test and probably bounce again. But I think another, if that was to happen, I think actually this increases the odds that this doesn't hold. And actually what you're going to see is probably support here at this juncture around let's just say around 4750 to 4800, I think is a prime area to swing long. So that's what I'd be looking at as far as the smaller time frames and swinging into this. I mean, overall things have changed. The structure has changed. What's different about, if we look at the weekly chart, what's different here, right? You had this big weekly bar. Okay, that's almost a $1,300 bar. So that belongs in the big weekly bar club, which we see here, which we see here, which we see here, coming off of this bull market, right? What's happened? Typically, you had a reversal of that move the following week. Overall, this was a bit of a follow through here, but what happened was we saw smaller and smaller follow through ranges as things started to compress and finish out, and then finally capitulate here. People are expecting a capitulation move like this bar here, but in reality, this was the capitulation. And then a lot of times you get a rounded bottom, out of that type of bottom, out of that type of bear cycle. So basically, guys, what's happened here is this big weekly bar is now followed by a bunch of little consolidation bars, and it's actually the flip of what we saw here at 6,000. So similar to this bar here, the weekly bars get smaller. So if we can consolidate in this area, but manage to stay within the range and start chewing on into this red zone, I think that really improves the probability of now getting into the next upper part of this range, which would be the 6,200 to 6,800 area. And once getting back into that, getting back above this major source of resistance, that's going to, I think that kind of gives you the green light that we're going to start seeing a nice steady move upward from those levels. If we switch to the hourly chart, what you're going to see, range is getting tighter, okay? And yes, we've seen that before out of large moves, and we're going to probably see a decent move out of that. This was the range that we had. So again, similar structure, right? Very tight range. So what we're going to want to see is a pretty decent move up out of the range and a retest. All right, this is going to be your key clue as to the direction it's going to break on the next move up. So again, on the hourly chart, you're basically looking at, you want to see a key indication that these levels are going to leave. Okay, so that's here and here. So what you're going to look for is, and again, this is drilling down to the hourly to kind of give you a clue on the higher time frame, but you're either going to see something like this come up, pull back, and then higher. That's the spot to get long. Or something similar on the downside, pull back, into those ranges and then lower. You know, maybe looking at something like that area to get longer or short if you're able to short, and then head down to that 4,800 area. Okay, so that's really what I'm looking for at this point the week ahead on the hourly is some type of range breakout. And again, what you want to see is a strong move out of that. You don't want to see one of these candles where it's just a wick and it comes back into play in the range. That's just a head fake. That's just liquidity hunting, and that's all that's going to do is create misery. You want to see a nice determined move like what you saw here out of this range. Okay, this is the top of the range, comes up, pulls back, and then moves higher. So again, this is talking like real short-term type moves. Give us clues as to what's going to happen longer term. All right, guys, now let's take a look at the expiration, Bitcoin CME expiration red line. We just went through it, and we also had a down move into it. So a lot of times what that implies is that we'll see a counter move up out of that, which we have seen, because a lot of times these expiration dates will see a counter move based on what happened going into them, like we see here. And if we look at an example that would mimic basically what we saw here, would be this monthly expiration, December 2018. We saw a move down and then a bounce out of that, and subsequent moves from there, like bouncing down. You had a bit of that here in February of this year, and then it turned back up. So interesting that we would see that move down. We've really, if the move bounce up does happen, I would expect to see that here. But again, this is that 50 period weekly moving average, and so I think this bounce, if it does come, is going to be short-lived into that. I really do think that's going to be key to that. Here's the other thing too. This is the Bitfinex long-short ratio. Okay, so when it's really low like this, that means there's a lot of shorts compared to longs, and vice versa. And if you take a look at historically, this is at pretty low levels where relative to readings that we've had in the past. So for majority of this bear market, we haven't seen many readings that get this low, okay? And if we look at them, what we've seen is that a lot of times when we do get these low readings, what happens is we do see some semblance of a bounce. Here we had coming down into this, it got low and sustained an upward move for quite a while. Here's another one where it was a pretty low reading but didn't really manifest, so they're not 100%, manifests to a sideways chop, a little bit of a dip and then back up. So you didn't really net much to the upside from this reading, although it didn't really fall over either, but it went sideways, pulled back once, and then actually did make a move higher. And then over here we see close readings that are close to this line, and basically this move bounced here, rolled over, you got another sharp reading lower, and that was as we headed back higher. So you do see, not 100% of the time, but you do see where these lower readings can result in a move higher. So do you get the sideways chop, meander, and then another move up a bit more? We'll see. But I do like to pay attention when that long short ratio does get overdone like it is here, because I think it does give you a heads up that you could possibly see that move higher. But again, I think that the cap on that's going to be around that 50 weekly moving average, and then overall we see more of a pullback down. The other thing we're going to look at lastly but not leastly is our crypto fear and greed indicator. And what we have here is this reading at 42. And honestly, guys, that's not really something that's going to be too actionable. I will say that this 42 area has been a little bit of a floor since things have turned around from the beginning of the year, where we've gone out of that bear market into a bull market, but not anything that I would be too terribly worried about here. Again, when this drops down, people are more fearful. When it comes up higher, people are more complacent, and usually that's where you see some of these market turns. So from the beginning of the year, well, actually I would say since February, we have seen market turns at these levels. So this is what I would call like a small term bullish indication, but that's a small sample size telling that this might be an area of support for a short term swing up. So we'll keep an eye on that. But long term, bigger sample size stuff, we're not anywhere near where we would be at extremes for a big move one way or the other. So, but we'll keep an eye on this, see if this 40 level does give us a little bounce. So we have an argument, guys, for a small bounce, maybe another try up to see and retest these previous highs that we've seen. But again, I think more importantly, you have to think longer picture, several weeks. We're probably going to see more of a pullback and consolidation. So there you have it for this week, guys. Hope that helps. Please hit like and subscribe. We really appreciate that, guys. We really appreciate the views. And if you're interested in joining us in the room or our indicators, head over to tradelikeagenius.com. All right, guys, I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks for watching. Take care.
Trade Genius.